For decades, public education debates have focused on funding, but there's a complex formula that decides how that state money is doled out to individual schools. Over the years, multiple lawmakers have discussed trying to update that formula, but those efforts haven't gained much traction. But now another group is taking a swing at it. Producer Ruth Brown sat down with Senator Den Hartog and Representative Wendy Horman to review the legislative session and talk about potential changes to that public school funding formula.
Now that we're more than a month out of the session, what are your thoughts?
It was an interesting session. I think it went a lot smoother than I thought it was going to. We had so many new members, both in the Senate and the House, a lot of people learning the ropes, figuring things out. We had a lot of new chairmen this year. I would say, on the whole, it was a very good session. Got a lot of things accomplished. Personally, I had a long list and was able to get just about everything across the finish line with everyone's help. But yeah, it was, on the whole, a really good session. Not without its, disappointments and its bumps along the way. But yeah, very good. So it's always nice to be able to be out and to reflect back a little bit from being out of the day-to-day craziness of it.
I have to agree with that. Significant property tax relief, massive investments in public schools and higher education for that matter, with the launch program and a balanced budget, tremendous investments in with one-time dollars in parks and recreation, transportation, local roads and bridges. A lot of we talk a lot about the direct property tax relief, but there was a lot of indirect property tax relief too, in terms of the state picking up costs that local governments now will not have to pick up. So I agree, some bumps and bruises along the way, but on the whole, a very good session.
Both of you mentioned education. The Empowering Parents Grant program has become permanent. Both of you supported it. We'll start with you, Representative Horman. Are you happy with how that has rolled out so far?
We were thrilled to see Governor Little recommend permanent ongoing funding for that. It really is focused on helping those kids who may not have the resources they need to be successful in whatever learning environment they're in. So, our lane is the policy lane to set up what the rules are. The implementation lane is not our role, and there have been some bumps along the way there, but we hope the state board is looking to repair some of those and improve it as this program becomes permanent.
Yeah. The other part of that is they'll be starting the parent advisory panel, which was part of the legislation that we had gotten passed the year before, and we're hoping that that parent advisory panel can help smooth those things out in implementation as parents are, going on the website and using the digital wallet and making purchases and trying to find out if the thing that they're interested in using the funds for their child, if it makes sense, if it's easy to use. And so I think we're looking forward to that. I know Superintendent Critchfield and the Speaker and the Pro Tem are looking at the appointments that they'll be making to that parent advisory panel, and I think that will be really important. The permanent funding part of it is so important. We've heard some great stories about how families have been able to use those grant dollars to supplement their kids' education.
You want to share any?
Yeah, I think we've heard about music lessons. Computer equipment was a big one early on. I don't know that we'll see as much of that moving forward. I know some families were able to purchase supplemental curriculum for things that they were interested in. Yeah, a wide variety, and all across the state. We're seeing students and families access those funds from all across the state.
And the more we review how those uses are, the more we can refine the program over time, really helping students focus in on maybe more the speech therapy or the therapy side of this or the tutoring side of it. And so I agree, this advisory panel will be really key in helping us refine and improve that program over time.
Already in the interim, both of you are working on the public school funding formula. For those that are not a legislator or a superintendent, they may not understand that. I'll start with you, Representative Horman. Can you walk me through a little bit? What does the public school funding formula currently look like? How does that work?
Oh, we'd need a lot longer than this show to say that.
Maybe condense it.
Well, what I will say is that it's celebrating its 30th birthday next year. So it was created in a time, we didn't have charter schools, we didn't have online learning, we barely had the internet, right, in '94. And so it was created for a different time, and it was an improvement at that time. But it's now time to modernize it and really focus on a formula that is based around students and their needs. We know that some students need additional resources to be successful, and we want to move to a per student formula that really focuses on transparency. It's not great to have a formula that very few people understand how it works. And so transparency, flexibility, simplicity, those are some of the guiding principles we're talking about moving forward with the draft that we worked on yesterday.
Yeah. So one of the differences between it is or I assume it hasn't gone into law, is funding based on attendance versus enrollment. Senator, can you walk me through a little bit some of the controversy around that?
Yeah, years ago when we were doing the public school funding formula interim committee, that really was a time when states all across the country were shifting from attendance to enrollment, really going back to even before the early 90s. It really was all about seat time, and that was how most states had their formulas. So that had been our focus with the interim committee. As we've gone through these last couple of years with the pandemic, we've had a temporary rule that funded based on enrollment. So it didn't change all the things about the formula. It was still very, very complex, but it did fund based on enrollment. Since that time, we have learned a great deal about the impacts of the pandemic and the types of students who have been impacted more by these changes. And so I think the latest that we're working on and that we've seen from across the country is that attendance is really important. And if kids aren't in school, they're not learning. And it's more than just seat time, but it's about that meaningful time in the classroom, with a teacher. And so what we're working on now is, I would call it kind of a hybrid. It really is not just enrollment, and it really is not just seat time. It's maybe reimagining what attendance looks like as we move to simplify and modernize the funding formula.
Idaho is part of a much larger trend nationally of declining enrollment across the country. We have a confluence of events going on with the declining birth rate, just a demographic fact. We had the pandemic and school closures and parents and families looking for alternatives. We've seen, unfortunately, some classrooms turn into political and cultural battlegrounds around gender ideology and racial ideology, and which has led to an increased demand for other options, school choice. And so Idaho is not immune to those factors. And so, the bottom line is, whether we go attendance or enrollment, we're looking at fewer children in the future. We have a strong in-migration, so Idaho's a little bit behind the national curve. But the bottom line is we really want to make it work for schools. We want to create incentives for schools to get students to school.
This is a complicated formula. What has been the hang-up in the past? Legislators have discussed this for years. Senator, we'll start with you.
So many hang-ups, all the hang-ups. One of the early things was we had 3 years of an interim committee that really was a very, very collaborative process. Everyone was at the table for 3 years. Superintendents, business managers, teachers, parents, legislators, the executive branch. I mean, everyone was at the table. When we came to, and I don't even remember what session it was, when we came to that session, I think our bill draft was around 100 pages, very complex, and really we got lost in the weeds on that one, and we weren't able to get through. And then by the following session, I think was when we were starting to deal with the impacts of the pandemic. And so we've kind of been on pause the last few years. And so there still is a goal and a desire to get things changed, but maybe different ideas about how to get there. And that's true with almost all legislation. So it'll be, as we work on a draft, it will again be a collaborative process. There's no formal interim committee, but we know the players and who really cares and has good insight. So
we'll get that draft ready and get it out to them and work with them this summer to hopefully finalize it and have it ready to go by fall. One of the good pieces of news is, regardless of how the money is distributed or even expended, is there's so much of it right now. School districts still have over $300 million in ESSER funds. Those are COVID relief funds that the federal government sent with almost no strings directly to school districts. School districts are sitting on over $500 million in their savings accounts. 2.3 billion was the base we built on from last year. We added 380 million to that this year through the formula, and then another 200 million on top of that through legislation like Superintendent Critchfield's CTE bill, the school safety money, the property tax relief, $85 million directly out to school districts. So school districts really do have access to a lot of funding right now as we transition out of pandemic mode operations back into hopefully new and improved operations.
There was a tremendous amount of funding invested this year, but on March 14th, we will see many bonds and levies across the state. What do either of you make of that? We'll start with you, Senator.
Well, here I represent part of the West Ada School District. Theirs is a bond, so new capital improvements. I believe it's around $500 million, so a huge ask of the property taxpayers. I think, the folks will have to assess if what the school district is proposing makes sense to them. West Ada historically has been a very fast-growing district, although some of the numbers Representative Horman had found is that they're pretty flat on enrollment right now. So I think we'll see what the assessment is from the voters about whether or not they've made the case for the use of that. I believe it's some new elementary schools and some refurbishment of some existing facilities. The challenge on the levy side, which is different than the bonding for capital improvements, on the levy side is looking at what we've done as a legislature, the investments that we've made not only through the property tax relief bill, but some of the other investments that we've made through the formula and specific line item distributions to the school districts. Is some of those levies, if someone were to sit down and pencil it out, may not make sense to the property taxpayers as they go to the polls, as they consider what actions the legislature took to fund education this year.
Representative, you chair the Appropriations Committee. What is your takeaway when you see so many bonds and levies on the ballot?
Well, we've heard for years that there's concern that the state's not sending enough. But until last year, there was no law requiring districts to disclose on the ballot why they were levying for supplemental levies. And so we added that last year. I personally went and did an analysis of what they were levying for. And so every box that we checked this year, certified teacher salary, classified staff teacher salary, which means bus drivers and lunchroom workers and playground workers and those sorts of positions in the school, paraprofessionals, that was on the list. School safety was on the list. So really, we have come in and checked those boxes. A year ago, we heard that if we made this investment in literacy funding, which in many districts pays for full-day kindergarten, they would not need to levy for that. So I will be observing with a very watchful eye how these levies go now that the state is sending funds for those needs that have been previously had to be on property taxes according to some districts, and their patrons have agreed with them. We'll see how that rolls out in the coming months.
Possible changes to the public school funding formula are still in draft form, but Idaho Reports will keep an eye on them in the next legislative session.